So welcome to everyone. It's nearly showtime, so let's get underway. So Ramosha Alshikh, who is our friend for the year, lived, as you know, in the golden age of Tzfat. He wrote extensively. He wrote Perushim, an extensive Perush on the Torah, of course. He also wrote on the 5 Megillos. He also wrote on many other books of the Tanakh, and he's very wide-ranging in that regard. What I'm trying to get at, though, is he did not write on Rosh HaShanah or the festivals per se, and in order to glean some thoughts from the writings of Alshikh on our subject, so naturally I went to the psukim in the Torah that discuss Rosh HaShanah. Now, what's interesting, as you may or may not be aware, is that although Rosh Hashanah is mentioned explicitly in the Torah, it's a mitzvah min ha-Torah. Of course, shofar is mentioned in the Torah about Rosh Hashanah, and Rosh Hashanah as a Yom Tov, as we'll see, is mentioned clearly in the Torah. It's not one of the Shalosh Regalim. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, of course, are a kind of unit in their own right. And it has a different kind of feel, a different rhythm, a different spirit, in a sense, than the Shalosh Regalim. What is further remarkable, though, which, to be honest, I was aware of, but it was only when I set myself to learning what he has to say, what Alshikh has to say about the psukim, is that the Torah deals with Rosh Hashanah only very briefly. There's like one pasuk. I mean, there's some description of the karbanos, but otherwise there's just one short reference in Parshas Pinchas, and in Parshas Re'eh, where the festivals are mentioned, Rosh Hashanah does not appear. The only place where we can find the mitzvah Rosh Hashanah presented in the Torah is in Parshas Emor, that is Vayikra chapter 23. So if you have a Chumash to hand, it would be useful to make to draw on the Chumash, to see the text of the Chumash. As I said, what Alshikh says about Rosh Hashanah derives from his comments on those psukim. He does write at length on these psukim, but the actual verbiage in the Torah is very terse. In fact, the whole reference to Rosh Hashanah is about 1.5 psukim really in the Torah. So if you look with me in Parshas Emor, chapter 23, verse 23. If you've got the art scroll Chumash, the stone Chumash is on page 686. That's a standard introduction, although we'll see Alshikh has something important to tell us about that pasuk. Daber el bnei Israel lemar. Again, that is almost a kind of repetition. So here we have the half pasuk on our subject. On the 7th month, on the first of the month, Yelechem Shabbason shall be for you a sabbatical, should be like a Shabbat, a form of Shabbat. In other words, it should be a holy day and a day of rest. Shabbat comes from the word rest. Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh, a day of recalling or remembering the Trua. Mikra Kodesh, a holy gathering, a holy calling, or holy summons. The Torah here says clearly that it has the status, what we call colloquially a Yom Tov, a Chag, which is restricted in Malacha. V'kraptem mishel Hashem, and on that day you shall bring a special fire offering to God, which is not explained what is that karban here, but in the book of Bamidbar and Parshas Pinchas, the Torah writes at greater length about the particular karban. But in terms of establishing the nature or the character of Rosh Hashanah, this is all we have to work with. Says Alshikh, his first observation, as is frequently the case, is an astute but a subtle observation which could easily escape the attention of the reader. He asks, firstly, why does the Torah say lemor? So that we can understand, because lemor is always to tell someone else. Lemor saying what I'm telling you now, you should say to others, meaning to say to Bnei Israel. So that is where we can understand that. Daber Bnei Israel, but why again say lemor? Now that is a subtle question, but in a way it's almost obvious if you think about it. The Torah says lemor twice. It could say, lemor, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, in other words, this is what you shall repeat. Daber el bnei Israel, b'chodesh hashvi, etc. Why does he have to repeat the word lemor? And if lemor means to say it over, to repeat it, to another audience, he already said, Lemor, he says, why does it say Lemor twice? Okay, that's the first question. Then he makes the observation that the word teruah, which is the main word, because here we have Yom Teruah, later on it says Yom Teruah in Parshas Pinchas, it says Yom Teruah, a day of teruah, a day of like trumpet or sounding, the producing the note of the teruah. And here it says Zichron Teruah, and that, by the way, is how we know that Rosh Hashanah is also Yom HaZikaron. It's the day of remembering. It's a day when Hashem recalls and evaluates the previous year, and perhaps more generally, a person evaluates our behavior collectively in the previous year, perhaps over the previous years as well. But Zichron Teruah, what does the word Teruah mean? So the art school people render it shofar blasts. And you probably know that the word teruah refers to a particular type of note on the shofar, as opposed to tekiah, which is a different note. But the Torah refers to the character of the day with regard to teruah. Now, what does the word teruah actually mean? So it is evident from the context that it's a sound. We have the word teruah. It means like a bahare osem. It's a word that is like a summons or a loud note on a shofar or a trumpet. But what is the meaning of the word? So the word teruah can have two meanings. Probably the main derivation of the word teruah is from the word broken. Like it says, Tero'im b'shevet barzel, smash them with an iron, mace or an iron weapon. A pasuk says elsewhere. We discussed last year, for those who remember, when we did Ksava Kabbalah. So he has something to say about the word teruah deriving from to smash or to break apart, to break asunder. In which case the meaning is Zichron Teruah, it means that the people, you and I, we shall feel the brokenness. Like the Hasidim say, there's nothing so whole as a broken heart. The feeling of inadequacy, the feeling of insufficiency, the feeling that I'm so incomplete. That is the posture in my mind that I need to embrace, that I need to adopt in order to be worthy of merit and blessing in the year ahead. If conversely, I feel complete and maybe self-satisfied, smug, and arrogant, then of course I am setting myself up for a harsh judgment. So at the one hand, teruah refers to being broken, being humbled, and that is the right way that a person can hopefully be worthy of a favorable judgment. The problem with that is that it's a bit downbeat, and I suppose to a certain degree, when we contemplate Rosh Hashanah, we do feel some of the fear, some of the anxiety of the judgment, and that is part of the experience. Says Alshikh, though, there's another meaning, and the other meaning is the meaning that the Torah immediately highlights. Let's read it again. The Torah first says Yom Shabbaton. The first thing about this first day of the seventh month is it's a Shabbaton. It's a day of rest. It's a day of cessation from labor. So Yelechem Shabbaton, it's like a bank holiday. Who doesn't like a bank holiday? So it's a great thing. So it's joyful, and we're very grateful and very pleased at having a day off. Then it says Zichron Teruah, which you mentioned is broken, but then the Torah immediately says it's a day of cessation of labor and of effort. So on the one hand, that's a restriction, and that contributes to the holiness of the day, but at the same time, it's not a work day, it's a day off. And that, he says, alludes to the other meaning of teruah. The other meaning of teruah, like it says in I think V'zos HaBracha, it says Hashem Elokav imo usruas melech bo. Hashem, his God, is with him, usruas melech bo. And the friendship from the word re'ut. Teruah is lashon re'ut. A re'ah is a friend. Re'ut is amity, like we say in the Sheva Brachas. Gila ritza dina v'chedva ahava v'achva shalom v're'ut. So Teruah Yom Teruah means a day of friendship. Truas Melech Bo, alluding to that pasuk. He actually doesn't mention that pasuk. I think that's what he has in mind. Truas Melech Bo, the friendship, the amity of the king is within him, is within the Jewish people. So the word Teruah therefore has a double meaning, and says Alshikh, the Torah here highlights, the Torah prioritizes Yom Shabbaton in order to emphasize that this is a day of joy. This is a day of which is a chag, which is a festival, and it has components of the joy and the delight, and you might say the celebration, like lahavdil. Other people imagine that the Jewish New Year should be a time for partying and drinking, which of course it is not. But there is some element of that. There is some element of celebration. On the other hand, we also have the emas hadin, the fear or the awareness, maybe some of the anxiety of the judgment. He says in this way we can explain why it says lemor twice, because there are two aspects. Speak to the children of Israel and tell them about this festival, which has two components, has two aspects. That's the double lemor, which I love it, how astute and how what brilliant attention to detail we have in Alshikh, illuminating a repetition of a word which could otherwise easily escape the attention of the reader. So these are the two components. There's the dual theme. There's the theme of the joy, and there's the theme of the mishpat and the judgment and the recollection and the scrutiny and the assessment of our behavior in the year that has just been concluded. Then he suggests another approach, which is a bit similar, but it adds a bit. And just as a comment, now that we've nearly completed our studies together of Alshikh, I've noticed that very often, I mean, in general, this book, this Sefer, the commentary of Alshikh, which extends to nearly 2,000 pages in the printing that I have on the Chumash, there is not so much repetition, but he says a similar idea from a different angle. He frequently will analyze a subject, sometimes at length, and then he'll go back and look at it perhaps in a completely different way, sometimes in a similar way. And the reason for that is that these Perushim are recorded by the author himself from the oral lectures that he gave, from the drushes that he gave. And over the years, probably there are some themes or some passages that he would return to year after year, or maybe from time to time over the course of many years, and analyze them in different ways. And when he sat down to write the Sefer, so he edited it. For the most part, it's edited quite, in a very good quality way, although it's quite sophisticated as well. It's not easy access. But so I'm not saying that the editing is faulty, but he will sometimes review or revisit a subject which he has already presented, and that's the case over here. He says a similar idea in a slightly different way. He says there's another approach, asking another question, again a very astute one. Why does the Torah say Daber b'nei Yisrael lemor b'chodesh hashvi b'echad hachodesh yihiyeh lachem shabbason? So prima facie, what's superfluous there? The word yihiyeh is. Why doesn't the Torah just say b'chodesh hashvi b'echad lachodesh shabbaton? That the Torah can just present what it is. Why does it say it shall be for you? Yihiyeh lachem, it shall be for you. So he says that the nature of the King of Kings is different than a Melech Basar V'Dam. A king who hears that a certain city or province has rebelled against him, and there are traitors there, and they're plotting an insurrection, or maybe they've mounted an insurrection. So he goes to the city, he punishes the malcreants. He will probably execute the whole lot of them in order to show, firstly, in order to rout out the traitors or the rebels, the mutineers, but also to demonstrate for others. He wants to show his power and how he rules. Perhaps he rules fairly. I'm sure, in the mashal, let's say he rules fairly. He's not capricious, but the judgment is harsh, and he's looking for someone, maybe a group of people, to become not so much the scapegoats, but who are guilty, and he wants to punish them. He's keen to punish them in order to warn others. He says that is the way of a melech basar v'dam, a king of flesh and blood. The King of Kings is not that way. He says that he doesn't want to avenge himself against those who have sinned against him, those who have rebelled against him, but rather HaKadosh Baruch Hu is chafetz chesed. We say that in the liturgy as well. Ki chafetz chesed hu. Hashem doesn't delight and doesn't seek out the punishment and the downfall of the wicked, but rather he would much prefer that a person does teshuvah, and even those who have rebelled and who have transgressed, that they reconsider, they recognize their errant ways, and they come back to him. That's what Hashem desires. So therefore, this is the lemor and lemor. This is why the Torah says that the zichron truah is the hachna, is the humility and the submission. But that itself will be transformed into simcha. So take another look at the pasuk. Zichron Trua Mikra Kodesh. It will be a Zichron Trua referring to the sense of brokenness and the humility. Lo sa'asu b'kravteni shel Hashem. You'll bring an offering to God. The feeling of inferiority, of inadequacy, will be transformed to a time of joy. So according to this perspective, yes, in contemplating the day of judgment, there is some anxiety, but the day itself should uplift us. The day itself should be a source of joy. And that's why it says lemor and lemor, because there are two aspects. The initial aspect is anxiety, but actually, when we look at it more closely, when we experience it, we should experience the uplift, the joy, and the exhilaration and the inspiration. Then he makes another very beautiful comment based on the Zohar, in which he says, quoting the pasuk in Eov. Now, I'm no expert in the book of Eov, one of the very difficult books of the Tanakh, the book of Job, but I have learned it a little bit, and I recall the beginning, before it gets quite difficult. The beginning describes this person, Eov, very righteous, very successful, well regarded, and then the Torah says, Vayhi hayom, and it was a certain day, V'yavo'u b'nei ha'Elohim, and the angels were assembled before God. Vayhi hayom, the Zohar says, Vayhi hayom, hayom alludes to Rosh Hashanah. It was Rosh Hashanah, that day in which Hashem decided to test Eov, was Rosh Hashanah, and that's why he sought to evaluate and to assess Eov. Of course, this difficult irony is that Eov was righteous, and nevertheless he was subjected to a very difficult trial. But in any case, the pasuk in Eov goes on to say, "V'yavo gam hasatan b'socham." B'nei ha'Elohim, the angels gathered. V'yavo gam hasatan b'socham, and the Satan came amongst them as well. And he was the one who spoke up to God and said, well, Eov is righteous because everything goes his way. Successful, well regarded, he's popular, he has a wonderful family, he's very affluent, he can afford to be charitable, and by doing acts of charity, he wins the devotion and admiration and affection of everyone around him. He's got an easy life. So the Satan said, put him to the test. Okay, I don't want to go into theology, the theodicy of it, but Alshikh observes that it says, Vayhi hayom, it was that day, meaning Rosh Hashanah, V'yavo gam hasatan b'socham. It says Alshikh, a beautiful idea, maybe a bit speculative. He says the Torah here is hinting to the way Hashem judges the world on Rosh Hashanah. It was on Rosh Hashanah. Hashem's primary interest is to listen to the angels, the supporting angels, those who will report or who will represent our good deeds, the mitzvot that we have fulfilled. V'yavo gam hasatan b'socham. The Satan just kind of skulks in as a maybe slightly unwelcome participant. What's the point, according to Alshikh? The point is that Hashem seeks lahatos klape chesed. He seeks to find the basis to judge a person and to judge the generation favorably. And he says this is hinted to in the fact that the Torah says, it shall be for you, meaning that, yes, there is some anxiety, there is some awareness that our future hangs in the balance, but Yom Shabbason, lachem Shabbason, it will be transformed for you into a day of joy and to a day of Chag, in which we have a cessation from work because we have something to celebrate the beginning of the new year. In the 10 minutes or so we've got left, I want to share with you another approach that Alshikh mentions later on in his comments on Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur, because he links Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur, perhaps unsurprisingly, in his parish. And I want to share with you a thought about Sifrei Chaim and Sifrei Mesim. He quotes the very well-known Gemara, one of the most well-known Talmudic teachings about the three books that are open in heaven. And he says we have a vision, we have a metaphor of the Sifrei Chaim and Sifrei Mesim, the book or the books of those who are living and those who are no longer living. So, of course, the primary metaphor is the three books a person has written in the book of life or written in the other book. And the Beinonim are in the intermediate position, and their judgment is delayed until Yom Kippur, if they do tshuva, again, as is very well known. But we find in our liturgy the idea of the multiple books. Perhaps an individual's name can appear in more than one book, because maybe he could go either way. Maybe he's a Benoni, like probably most of us are, but in some respects, he may have transgressed grievously, and his name might appear in the other book. And no doubt he's done many mitzvot, for which reason his name could appear in the Sefer Chaim. So maybe there are multiple books for a person. But there's another possibility, which evidently is part of our tradition as well, as we see in the liturgy, and that is that a person, that not only the living are judged, but even those who are no longer living are judged as well. But there's another possibility in accordance with the Kabbalistic tradition, and that's what I want to share with you tonight as well. It says that we find the reference to the Sifrei Chaim, the Sifrei Mesim, and he says that we need to consider, when it comes to divine judgment and justice, and the way that a person is confronted sometimes with challenges in life, sometimes with misfortune, sometimes with heart-wrenching tragedy that envelops a person. And this phenomenon inevitably gives rise to that difficult theological problem of tzaddik v'ralo, the righteous person who suffers. And for that matter, we have the iniquitous person, the rasha v'tovlo, who flourishes, who prospers. Of course, the Gemara discusses this in more than one place, but perhaps the most explicit place where the Gemara brings it up is in explaining Moshe Rabbeinu in his dialogue with Hashem after the Chet HaEkel. And that's where we have those eloquent words, Hareini na'es drachecha, show me your ways, in which Moshe asks God to reveal to him the system, the explanation, maybe the algorithm by which he runs the world. And the response is somewhat cryptic, Lo yirani ha'adam v'chai, no one will see me and live. And we've spoken about that on various occasions in the past. But the Gemara explains that the response, that Moshe's question was, explain to me this difficult phenomenon, which is as old as the human condition itself. Tzaddik v'ralo, the suffering of the righteous. And the Gemara says that Hashem responded again in a somewhat cryptic way, but the Gemara kind of spells it out and says, well, there may be a tzaddik gamor and a tzaddik she'eno gamor. The tzaddik who's completely righteous, and there's another tzaddik, but he's not completely righteous. So he needs some punishment in this world, and his reward in the next world will be complete. But the Gemara also says, there is a tzaddik ben tzaddik. There's a person who is righteous, and he comes from righteous antecedents as well. So we know there is the idea, which is also problematic, but there is such an idea that Hashem will preserve righteousness from generation to generation, but Hashem may also visit punishment on subsequent generations. That if you have several generations of villainy in a certain family, Hashem may delay the judgment, but eventually there's a day of reckoning. And the Torah says that almost explicitly. Of course, that's quite problematic, because does that mean a man or a woman can be wicked throughout his life, but Hashem doesn't punish him because he's waiting for the next generation or the generation after? And then finally, you've got the third or fourth generation. He's no worse than his parents or grandparents, but nevertheless, the reckoning comes to him. The day of reckoning rains down upon him. Now, I've got something further to say about that, but I'm not going to tell you now because we're doing Alshikh. I want to tell you what Alshikh says about this. He says that this idea of the tzaddik ben tzaddik, and for that person things go well. The one who suffers, the righteous man or woman who suffers, is the one whose parents were wicked. So even though he is righteous, but he's still paying a debt from the previous generation, which, as we've just said, is a bit problematic as well. Says Ramosha Alshikh, the explanation for this difficult phenomenon is in the Sod HaGilgul, is in the secret of reincarnation. When the Torah says, when it says in the liturgy, Sifrei Chaim Sifrei Mesim Psuchim Lefanai, that the books of the living and the dead are before me, says Alshikh, the meaning is a reference to the Sod HaGilgul Kadas Chacham Emes. The book of the deceased is open because the man or the woman who stands in shul, or maybe even not in shul, on Rosh HaShanah, is also in the book of the dead because of a previous life. Because in a previous life, that person lived his life in a certain way, for good or for better, and that life is recorded after 120 years in the book of the deceased. But that soul may come back again, and maybe again and again. So when it says the books of the living, the books of the deceased, it means the same person, the same soul in another previous Gilgul, in which case a person may be called upon to rectify the shortcomings of a previous existence, or a person might be punished for a previous existence. A person may be quite righteous, but maybe the primary reason that that person is in this world is to rectify a failing from the earlier iteration of that soul. And with this he explains it. It says, Rasha ben tzaddik, a person who is a Rasha, but he's ben tzaddik, so things may go well for him. And we may wonder, why is that villainous person prospering so much? Because maybe in a previous life, he was righteous. I'll read you a few words. His previous incarnation. And maybe this righteous person was wicked in a previous generation, and that's why he's paying a price for it. And the other way around, the wicked person perhaps was righteous and is getting the reward from that time. And he quotes another pasuk in Eov, which I've seen quoted in the past, in conjunction with this doctrine of reincarnation, which, by the way, not all Torah authorities endorse. I don't mean people in our generation, even classic authorities, Rambam and Sajjan Gaon, many were actually quite opposed to the idea of reincarnation, but many other authorities endorse it. Certainly Alshikh does. Here's a pasuk in Eov. Hein kol eli yif'al el pa'amayim shalosh im gaver. Hashem will do this with a man 2 or 3 times. This is the cleansing, this is the rectification, the purging from his initial or his previous incarnation. And he says, with this we can also understand, and with this we'll end, something that appears in the liturgy as well. He says explicitly, the formulation of the sages in Yom Noraim. It's interesting, by the way, Alshikh, of course, was a Sephardi, but evidently his minhag was the same words that we have as well. You remember the word, the events of all time, and you call to account all of those who created from earlier times, kedem, to remember many events, many actions. So you say, what's the relevance of that? I'm going to be judged on my action in the past year, maybe previous years as well. Of what importance is Maaseh Olam? So the way I've always understood it, we say that Hashem remembers not only my life, but everyone's life from the earliest time. Hashem has a plan for the world, for this coming year, and for all of the years. It fits into a divine plan which is far beyond our ability to comprehend. I think that is true. But Alshikh says something else. He says, Kol Yitzrei Kedem, because maybe I have been here before. Hashem remembers what I have done before in a previous life, in a previous existence. He says, that's why it says, Poked Kol Yitzrei Kedem, Gam Gilgulehem, even their previous incarnations. Lizachem Maasim Rabim, to remember many deeds. He says, Letzaref Maasim Rabim Shekadmu Imshal Elu. Those events, those actions which have happened before, together in conjunction with the actions in my own life that I can remember, because Hashem judges every person not only for now, but even in accordance with the previous existence. And with, he says, and with this we can understand the vidui, but I'm going to save that maybe when we talk about Yom Kippur. So hold on to that idea, and we'll see how it fits into the vidui as well. I wish you wonderful Shabbos, and a Kasima v'Chasima Tova should be a year of bountiful blessing and achievement for all of us, a year of good health and a year of healing for those who are in need of healing. And we should only share good news together. I look forward to seeing you, B'ezrat Hashem, whether in person or on Rosh HaShanah maybe, but in the new year, at least in this same medium as well. Hopefully we'll be back in Mitzvah Hashem, and we've got Alshikh and Yom Kippur still to look forward to. I wish you, again, a wonderful Shabbos. Should be a year of fulfillment of all your aspirations.